A week before graduation, my brother smashed my thesis laptop. My parents dismissed me, saying, "Quit crying and get another one." It didn't ruin my future, but it did end something that made my family blow up my phone at 2 a.m. I walked into my bedroom and immediately noticed my laptop lying on the floor, not like it had simply slipped off the desk, but more like someone had treated it like sports equipment and slammed it down there. The screen was completely wrecked, spiderwebbed with cracks, and coffee had spread around it in a sad little puddle. Somewhere in that ugly mess was my senior thesis, 6 months of research, coding, stress, and slowly questioning my sanity. Ryan was standing by my desk holding an empty coffee mug, looking way too calm. He just said, "Oops, not. Oh man, I'm really sorry. Just oops," like he dropped a paper towel. I looked at him and said, "What did you do?" And it wasn't really a question because I already knew the answer. He shrugged it off and said it was an accident and told me to chill. I picked up the laptop anyway, hit the power button, and got nothing. No lights, no sounds, just dead, completely gone, along with my thesis. I told him straight up that my thesis was on that laptop. He asked if I had backups, and yeah, I did, from 2 weeks ago, which meant my entire final chapter was missing. He told me to just rewrite it since I was smart, and I just stared at him. My 25-year-old older brother who didn't have a job, still lived at home, and somehow thought giving advice was his role in life. Rewriting 40 pages in a week wasn't exactly realistic, but he acted like it was nothing, shrugged again, and asked what the big deal was. The big deal was half a year of work, real work, data analysis, original research, code I'd built from nothing, all gone because Ryan couldn't walk past a desk without wrecking something. I told him he did it on purpose. He said it was an accident, and kept repeating it like that made it true. I pointed out his phone was clearly in his pocket since he claimed he was reaching for it, and when he glanced down and saw it, he muttered something about another phone, which was ridiculous because he only has one. He brushed it off and told me to stop being dramatic. That's when I heard Mom and Dad coming up the stairs after my yell apparently echoed louder than I realized. Mom asked what all the noise was, out of breath, and I pointed at the destroyed laptop and said Ryan broke it and my thesis was on there and I graduate in 2 weeks. Dad looked from the laptop to the coffee to Ryan and said accidents happen and told me not to be dramatic, which was wild considering my work just died in front of me. I told them it wasn't an accident and that he knocked it off on purpose, and Ryan's voice went all high and defensive as he denied it and claimed he was just walking by. I reminded everyone that he was in my room, drinking coffee, near my desk, even though he'd been told 1,000 times not to bring drinks in there. Mom sighed and said this wasn't productive, which honestly made my head spin, because you know what's really not productive, smashing someone's computer a week before graduation. I said the actual problem was that my thesis was gone, and Dad immediately pulled out his wallet like he always does, because in his world money fixes everything. He asked how much a new laptop cost, and I said that wasn't the point, but he told me Best Buy was open until 9 and to just go get another one, problem solved. I looked at the credit card he held out, then looked at Ryan, who was clearly trying not to smile. I asked what was going to happen to Ryan since he destroyed my property, but Mom jumped in automatically and said it was an accident, the same line she's been using my entire life. I could practically see the highlight reel playing in my head, like when we were 10 and Ryan accidentally knocked over my science fair volcano the night before the fair, and I rebuilt it at 3 in the morning while he got ice cream for being supportive, or when I was 15 and he borrowed my car without asking and crashed it into a mailbox, and I got lectured about sharing. Or when I was 18 and he dumped $5,000 from my college fund into his friend's crypto idea and lost all of it, while Mom said he was just trying to help. And now here we were, 1 week before graduation, and Ryan destroyed my thesis, and somehow everyone was acting like it was my fault. I told them I wasn't being dramatic, I was being realistic, because this work determined whether I graduated with honors, which affected my job offers, and Dad cut in asking about backups like that settled it. I told him they were from 2 weeks ago, and he pushed the card closer, while Mom snapped at me asking why I was trying to get my brother in trouble. I took a breath, reminded myself to stay calm, and said again that 6 months of work were gone, and Ryan helpfully added that it was an accident, still barely holding back a smirk. Dad checked his watch and told me to go since the store closed soon. I looked at all of them, my family, the people who were supposed to be on my side, and something inside me shifted, not broke, just moved. like I finally realized I was done standing where I always had. I said fine, took the card, and Mom smiled like everything was solved, calling it an easy solution. I grabbed my keys, walked out, got into my car, and sat there gripping the steering wheel for 5 minutes trying not to scream. Then I called Cole, my roommate and best friend, basically the only person I know with common sense, and told him Ryan destroyed my laptop. He freaked out and asked about backups, and I checked my phone, opened my cloud storage, and prayed it had synced. It had, from 3 days ago, not perfect, but survivable. Cole said that wasn't terrible and I could recover most of it, and I agreed. But then I stared at my dad's credit card and asked him how much damage you could do with a $15,000 limit. He went quiet and asked what I was thinking, and I told him my parents thought buying a new laptop fixed everything and that Ryan had gotten away with this kind of stuff his whole life because they always cleaned up after him. I looked at the black premium card in my hand, the one meant for emergencies, and said they told me to take care of the problem, so I was going to take care of all the problems. Cole told me I was scaring him, but I said not to be scared and to be ready to accept packages, and before he could ask more, I hung up, started the car, drove to Best Buy, and bought a top-of-the-line laptop for $2,000, because if I was spending their money, I might as well do it right after that. I drove toward home, then right past it, straight to Target, then to Amazon's website, then to every place I could think of where a $15,000 credit limit could actually make a dent. What Mom and Dad never understood was that handing me that card wasn't a solution, it was a weapon, and they'd just given it to someone who'd spent 22 years learning exactly how and where to use it. I got back home around midnight and found Ryan on the couch in the living room, headset on, deep into some game. He asked if I got my laptop. I said yes. He nodded and asked if we were good now, and I really looked at him for the first time. 25 years old, no job, no drive, no consequences, ever, and told him, yeah, Ryan, we're good. He went right back to his game and never noticed the smile on my face, the kind of smile that should probably come with ominous music. Over the next week, I worked like someone who'd sold his soul to caffeine and deadlines, pulling my thesis from the cloud backup, rewriting what was missing, rerunning data analysis, and sleeping maybe 15 hours total. My professor was sympathetic but didn't budge, telling me he was sorry about the laptop but the deadline still stood, and I told him I understood and that yes, I'd make it, because failing wasn't an option anymore. While I worked, packages started arriving, every day, sometimes twice a day, stacking up in my apartment while Cole watched them grow into a small mountain. He kept asking what was in all the boxes, and I kept telling him they were supplies and asking him to help me cite sources, and eventually he backed off, because he's a good friend, honestly better than most of my family. On day 6, Mom called to check in and asked if I got a laptop, and when I said yes, she immediately declared the problem solved, her favorite phrase, right alongside "don't be dramatic." She told me Dad was worried I'd hold a grudge, and I assured her there were no grudges at all, which made her happy, especially when she added that Ryan felt terrible, which wasn't true, but I was starting to feel something else entirely, clarity and a strange satisfaction that comes with a plan falling into place. She asked if I'd still come to graduation and bring the family. I said of course, and after we hung up, I told Cole she thought everything was fine, and when he asked if it was, I said not even close, but it would be. I submitted my thesis at 11:47 p.m. on deadline night, 13 minutes to spare, too exhausted to judge whether it was honors-worthy, but confident it was good enough. Graduation day showed up with all the usual pageantry, caps, gowns, speeches, and my family in the crowd. Mom dressed like a proud parent, Dad in his success uniform, and Ryan in jeans and a hoodie because effort has never been his thing. Mom hugged me and told me how proud she was, and I casually mentioned that I managed it despite Ryan destroying my work, which she brushed off as ancient history even though it was barely over a week ago. Dinner afterward was at Olive Garden because Dad was paying, and apparently unlimited breadsticks count as a celebration. And while Ryan scrolled his phone, Mom bragged loudly about my computer science degree being so marketable. Dad asked about job hunting. I told him I had 3 offers, which got his attention, but when I said I hadn't decided yet, and that it depended on a few other factors, Ryan finally looked up and asked what factors, and I just smiled and told him he'd see. That night, I finished packing, getting ready to move out in 2 days to a new apartment across the state, a new job, and a clean break from a family that always treated me like a side character in Ryan's never-ending mess. On my last night there, Ryan knocked on my door, asked if I was taking all the boxes, made a crack about my nerd stuff, and before he could leave I asked him if he regretted breaking my laptop. He called it an accident again, and I told him we both knew it wasn't, that he did it because I was about to graduate with honors and actually succeed at something he couldn't sabotage quietly, and his face told me everything. He shrugged and said I'd get over it, and I told him I already had, but that he wouldn't get over what came next. When he asked what that meant, I smiled and told him he'd find out soon, really soon, and for the first time in 22 years I was being completely clear. I closed the door and left him standing there confused and uneasy, which was exactly where I wanted him, because in 3 weeks, at 2 in the morning, he'd understand exactly what clarity looked like, and it was going to be spectacular. The next morning started recovery mode at 6 a.m. Coffee, laptop, and cloud backups forming the holy trinity of academic survival. And while the thesis was mostly intact, I still had 40 pages to rebuild in 6 days, which felt impossible but not unthinkable. Cole wandered out around noon and pointed out I'd been typing nonstop for nearly 6 hours, noticed more packages by the door, and asked again what I was doing. And when I told him I was securing my future, he said that wasn't an answer, which was fair, but it was the only one he was getting for now. That's the only explanation you're getting until Friday, I told him, and he finally backed off, which was the smart move. On Wednesday afternoon, Ryan texted me saying Dad wanted to know why there were so many charges on his credit card, and I replied that he should tell him I was taking care of the problem, just like he'd been told to do. Ryan clarified that Dad meant the laptop problem, and I said I was aware, after which the typing bubbles appeared, vanished, came back again, and finally ended with a weak, whatever, man, which honestly summed things up perfectly. On Thursday, my professor asked me to stop by her office, Dr. Chun, a brilliant researcher with zero tolerance for nonsense, and my stomach sank as soon as she said she'd been reviewing my progress. But instead of bad news, she told me my work was excellent, and that despite the laptop situation, she'd expected less, not more, and that I was firmly on track for honors. I asked her if she was serious, and she smiled and said absolutely, then added that my latest chapter felt sharper and more intense than expected, almost angry, like I was making a point. And as I thought about Ryan's smirk, Dad's credit card, and Mom's favorite line about not being dramatic, I admitted maybe I was, which made her smile even wider as she said anger can be clarifying and I should use it, which I very much was. Friday showed up fast, thesis due at midnight, and once again I finished at 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes to spare, hit submit, waited for the confirmation screen, read the words congratulating me on my submission, then closed the laptop and leaned back staring at the ceiling while Cole walked in with 2 beers and asked if I was done. And when I said yes and described the feeling as running a marathon while being chased by bears, he said that was oddly specific but accurate. I thanked him for the help and for not pushing too hard with questions, and when he pointed at the mountain of boxes and asked if I could finally explain, I told him not yet, but soon, at graduation, which he said was only 2 days away, and I admitted I was enjoying the mystery probably more than I should. Graduation day was everything it's supposed to be, sunny and warm, a crowd full of people who all looked proud and ridiculous at the same time, my family sitting in the middle section with Mom waving nonstop, Dad glued to his phone, and Ryan straight up asleep. And while the ceremony dragged on with speeches about dreams and futures, when they called my name, Alex Chun, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, summa cum laude, I crossed that stage knowing I'd already won something no one else in that room could see, and the victory lap hadn't even started. Dinner was, of course, at Olive Garden, because apparently that's tradition, and Mom couldn't stop talking about summa cum laude and how proud Grandma would have been, even though Grandma died when I was 8 and would have had no clue what Latin honors meant. And when Dad asked about job offers, I told him I had 3, all tech, good salaries, which finally got Ryan to look up and ask how good. And I smiled and said good enough that I wouldn't need to borrow anyone's credit card ever again. Dad shifted uncomfortably and brought up the card he gave me for the laptop, noting there were additional charges, significant ones. And when Mom asked what I bought since the laptop was only $2,000 and the statement showed $15,000, the table went dead silent. Ryan bolted upright, and Dad's expression hardened as I calmly said I bought what I needed. When Dad demanded to know what $15,000 of what, I repeated that I'd taken care of the problem like instructed, and when his lawyer voice kicked in and he ordered me to return everything immediately, I took a sip of water and said I couldn't because most of it had already been used or given away, which made Mom look like she might faint until I explained it went to people who needed it and that I'd send an itemized list tomorrow after I moved. Dad insisted on seeing it now. I said tomorrow, smiled, and reminded them this was supposed to be a celebration, right? Which made the rest of dinner painfully tense as Ryan stared at me like I was a stranger. Mom stress-ate breadsticks. Dad angrily scrolled through his phone, and I calmly enjoyed my pasta, my tiramisu, and a family photo where everyone looked mildly murderous except me. Back at the apartment that night, Cole cornered me and demanded answers. So I opened my laptop, pulled up a spreadsheet, and watched his eyes widen line by line as he realized I'd spent $15,000 on things that actually mattered, helping people who needed it and making sure Ryan never got another cent he didn't earn. And when I told him the money had originally been set aside for Ryan's big business opportunity, his franchise investment, his jaw dropped completely as I confirmed I'd absolutely redirected it. He called it nuclear, then corrected himself and called it justice. And while he warned Ryan might try to come after me, I reminded him I'd be 3 states away with a new job and a clear conscience by then, which made him laugh and call me insane, to which I replied that I was just efficient. On Sunday, moving day, I loaded my car while Ryan watched from the porch and accused me of running away, and I told him I was moving forward, not the same thing. And when he brought up Dad's $15,000, I calmly clarified it had been spent, not stolen, and that donations were final, mostly to charities, scholarships, and causes that actually help people, which made his face go red as he finally said out loud what we both knew, that I did it to screw him. No, I did this because you screwed me first, and Mom and Dad backed you up every time, and I was done being the responsible one while you coasted through life, I told him flat out. He said he was telling Dad, and I said Dad already knew because I was sending the itemized list that night, so he could see every dollar, every cause, and every reason I turned out better than Ryan ever would. Ryan stepped closer, right in my face, and asked if I thought I was better than him, and I told him I didn't think, I knew, because I graduated summa cum laude, had job offers lined up, and rebuilt my thesis in a week, and when I asked what he'd done, he had nothing to say. I told him he'd spent his life breaking things and blaming everyone else, and that I was done being his scapegoat. Then I got in my car and started the engine. He leaned into the window and warned me that whatever I was planning wouldn't work and that I'd regret it, and I smiled. The same smile from that first night, the one that should probably come with a warning label, and told him that in about 3 weeks he was going to get a very upsetting phone call, and that when it happened he should remember this moment, and remember I tried to warn him. He asked what I was warning him about, and I said consequences, because they were coming fast. Then I drove away and left him standing there in the driveway looking confused, angry, and just starting to realize something was very, very wrong. 3 weeks later, at exactly 2:07 a.m., my phone rang while I was sleeping peacefully in my new apartment, living my best life, and when I saw Mom's name on the screen and heard her crying and completely hysterical, I smiled in the dark because it was right on schedule and I knew this was going to be good. I let it ring 3 times to build suspense before answering and saying hello, and she immediately demanded to know what I'd done, so I sat up, turned on the lamp, checked the time, and asked what was wrong in my most innocent voice. She started hyperventilating about the credit card charges, the $15,000, and I casually said, oh, that, yeah, I bought what I needed, just like they told me to. She shouted that they told me to buy a laptop, and I said I did, and that it was very nice. Thanks for asking, which only made her more frantic before she handed the phone to Dad. His voice came on cold and sharp as he ordered me to return every single item immediately, and I told him I couldn't because most of it had already been used or donated and was non-refundable, which led to a long, terrifying silence. When he finally spoke, he sounded like he was choking on the word charitable, asking if I'd really spent $15,000 on donations, and I explained that yes, mostly charitable giving and some personal necessities, and reminded him that he gave me the card and told me to take care of the problem, which I did. I explained calmly that the laptop was just a symptom of a bigger issue, so I solved multiple problems at once, which was honestly pretty efficient. Ryan grabbed the phone and yelled that it was his money, and I corrected him by saying it was Dad's credit, given to me, and that it was funny how nobody mentioned an investment when they handed me the card and told me to stop being dramatic. I hung up, let the phone ring straight to voicemail twice, then answered the third call when Dad threatened to call the police, and asked him what exactly he planned to report, that he gave me his credit card and I used it with permission, because there were texts, voicemails, and witnesses, including Cole, who heard the whole conversation. He went quiet as it sank in that I'd planned this, then demanded the itemized list immediately, even though it was 2 a.m, so I told him to check his email in 5 minutes. I opened my laptop, pulled up the spreadsheet I prepared weeks ago, formatted it beautifully, added the graduation family photo at the top purely out of spite, titled the email itemized receipt as requested, and hit send before making popcorn and waiting. At 2:19 a.m., my phone blew up with messages from Mom, Ryan, and Dad, and I finally called back and put it on speaker because this deserved an audience, even if it was just me and microwave popcorn. I asked cheerfully if they'd gotten the list as Ryan screamed about $3,000 spent on gaming equipment, and I calmly clarified it went to a youth homeless shelter rec room, that the kids needed something positive, and that the thank you letter was really touching. He yelled that I donated his money to homeless kids, and I pointed out that the credit card statement said Richard Chun, not Ryan, which shut him up long enough for Dad to read off the next line, for $1,000 for coding boot camp scholarships, and I explained they were full rides for 3 students who were already enrolled and starting soon. When he said I had no right, I reminded him he gave explicit permission and that I still had the recording if he wanted to hear his own words. Then I moved on and told Mom she'd love the $2,000 donation to her favorite children's hospital, made in my name, complete with a certificate I'd forward, because she was always talking about how important that charity was. She sounded small when she responded, and Dad tried to say it wasn't funny, but I told him I thought it was hilarious and kept going, listing the new desk, chair, and home office equipment I bought for $1,500 since I'd be working remotely, which Ryan lost his mind over, followed by $1,000 worth of textbooks donated to the Community College Student Fund, because those kids actually needed help, unlike people who had everything handed to them and still got academically suspended twice. When Ryan shouted that he didn't fail out, I told him suspension twice was basically the same thing, and before he could recover, Dad interrupted about the $800 spent on therapy, which I happily explained was for my therapist, Dr. Morrison, a lovely woman who'd helped me unpack years of family trauma and had some very interesting theories about narcissistic family systems they might enjoy hearing about. And when Dad accused me of using their money to complain about them, I corrected him one last time and said their credit, and yes. She's been incredibly helpful, by the way, and according to her, I'm making excellent progress with setting boundaries, which made Mom let out this awful sound like a wounded animal. I also forgot to mention the food bank donation, $500, because unlike some people, I actually believe in helping those who are less fortunate, which set Ryan off completely as he screamed at me to stop saying that. I calmly asked him what exactly he was mad about, then invited him to name even one charitable thing he'd done with the thousands Mom and Dad had handed him over the years, and when he couldn't say a word, I told him that silence pretty much answered the question. I wrapped up the list with the final item, $200 miscellaneous, coffee shop gift cards for study groups, gas money for friends who helped me move, supporting people who actually show up for me, which apparently was a radical idea in that family. Dad's voice turned icy as he said I had no authorization for any of it, and I reminded him I had his voice recorded saying to buy what I needed, and I decided exactly what that meant. End of discussion. When he threatened to call the police, I told him to go ahead because I'd already spoken to a lawyer the day before and handed over everything, the texts, the voicemails, Cole's witness statement, and according to them, it was authorized use with verbal permission and impossible to prosecute, so he was welcome to waste his time. I could hear Dad breathing heavily, that tight, furious kind of breathing, before he said I'd pay back every cent, and I laughed and asked with what money since I was starting at $48,000 a year with student loans, rent, and a car payment. So if he wanted 15 grand, he could take a number. He said they'd sue me, and I asked for what exactly, reminding him that discovery would be a blast since I had years of emails documenting their favoritism toward Ryan, the money they poured into his mistakes, and the way they ignored my achievements, and that depositions were going to be very interesting. That's when Mom started really crying and asked why I was doing this when we're family, and I laughed again, not kindly this time, and explained that family doesn't shrug off a destroyed thesis like it's nothing and doesn't enable one son while neglecting the other for 22 years. When she asked why, I told her it was because Ryan destroyed 6 months of my work, and she told me to stop being dramatic because Dad handed me a credit card like it fixed anything, and because for once I wanted them to feel what I'd felt my entire life, powerless, dismissed, like my pain mattered less than someone else's convenience. Nobody spoke after that, and I kept going, explaining that the $15,000 had done more good in 3 weeks than it ever would have in Ryan's hands, with scholarship kids learning to code, shelter kids getting a safe place, students staying in school, and that I chose to invest in people who actually try instead of someone who coasts and breaks things. Ryan tried to call me selfish, but I warned him I was recording that too, and he shut up immediately. I then laid it out clearly, telling them they were going to accept the money was gone, accept that I had the legal right to spend it, and think very carefully before trying to retaliate, because if they did, I'd send every receipt, email, and text proving their favoritism to every aunt, uncle, cousin, and relative who thought they were such amazing parents. Mom gasped and said I wouldn't dare, and I told her to try me because I'd spent 3 weeks preparing and had documentation going back to middle school, science fair projects, college funds, car insurance payments, even job references they refused to give me, and if they wanted to escalate, I was ready. After a long stretch of whispered arguing, Dad said we'd discuss it later when everyone was calmer, and I told him there was nothing left to discuss since the money was spent legally and morally, and unless they wanted things to get much worse, it was over. I hung up and sat alone in my new apartment, in my new city, in my new life, feeling nothing but satisfaction, and when Cole texted asking why I was laughing so loud at 2:30 in the morning, I told him I'd just had the best conversation of my life, and that while he shouldn't worry, my family probably should. I turned off my phone, made more popcorn, watched a movie, and fell asleep around 4 in the morning, the best sleep I'd had in years, because for the first time I wasn't waiting for my family to see me, I was letting them see the consequences of never looking. The following week, Ryan's big investor meeting finally happened, and he walked in confident and prepared right up until they asked for proof of capital, specifically bank statements showing the $15,000 threshold, and according to a cousin who worked at the same firm, Ryan's face looked like someone had just told him Santa wasn't real and stolen his dog at the same time. He tried explaining, blaming me, spinning it every way he could, but they declined him on the spot, and his big opportunity died in a conference room on a Wednesday afternoon while I sat 3 states away eating takeout in total peace. Mom sent one last email that week saying she didn't understand why I'd hurt my brother like this, that he was devastated and this had been his chance, that they'd tried so hard to help him find his path, and I ruined it over a laptop and pride, and that she thought they raised me better. I read it twice, then replied that they did raise me better despite themselves, that I learned resilience because they never protected me, independence because they never supported me, and the value of hard work because they never rewarded mine, and that I genuinely thanked them for that. I told her I didn't ruin Ryan's chance, I just stopped subsidizing his failures, and if his path depended on money taken from a credit card they handed me, then maybe it wasn't much of a path. Added that I was doing great by the way, thanks for not asking, and signed my name. I never got a response and didn't need one, because the message was clear, the game was over, and I'd won. And when Ryan called 17 times over the next 3 days and left increasingly unhinged voicemails starting with, "Dude, seriously, we need to talk," I ignored every single one. Message 7 said, "You're a selfish piece of," with the rest deleted, and by message 17 he'd settled on, "I hope you're happy. You destroyed my life," which was ironic because I was, in fact, extremely happy. Mom tried a different angle and sent long guilt-filled texts about family and forgiveness, and I replied exactly once that carrying 22 years of anger wasn't healthy, so I chose to release it through charitable giving, after which she stopped texting entirely. Dad went full legal mode and had his lawyer send a demand letter, but my lawyer, who happened to be Cole's cousin, responded with a single paragraph explaining authorized use, verbal permission, and a recommendation that the client accept the loss, and after that the letters mysteriously stopped. The best part of all of it was that Ryan had to get a real job, and not just any job, but at Best Buy in the computer department, which was irony so perfect it felt scripted. About 6 weeks later, Mom actually called instead of texting and asked if we could really talk, and I told her that depended on whether she was calling to blame me or to listen, and after a long pause, she said to listen first and then talk. She admitted they were starting to realize they might have enabled Ryan while being too hard on me, which I pointed out was the understatement of the century since they gave him everything and gave me nothing, then acted shocked when he turned out entitled and I turned out independent. And for once she didn't argue and admitted that was exactly what they'd done. I told her Ryan lost his investment opportunity because of me, but that it wasn't much of an opportunity anyway. No plan, no experience, just their $15,000 and a dream. And when she said he was trying now and had gotten a job at 25, I congratulated him for reaching the milestone most people hit at 16, which she called cruel and I called reality, explaining that I didn't hurt him. I just removed the shelter they'd built around him. She cried quietly and said she didn't know how to fix it, and I told her she couldn't, at least not now. Maybe not ever, because 22 years of choices come with consequences, and when she asked about her and Dad, I said they could be in my life eventually if they actually changed, but not today, not this year, and maybe not next year either, which she whispered was fair before we hung up. 3 months later, I got a message that shifted something deep in me, from Marcus, one of the scholarship kids, telling me he'd finished the boot camp, landed a junior developer job making $55,000 a year, and was now supporting his mom and little sister, all because of me, and I stared at that message for 10 straight minutes before showing it to Cole and asking if it was weird that it made me emotional. To which he replied that accidentally doing good while being petty was very on brand for me. Meanwhile, Ryan spent his evenings on Reddit complaining about toxic family members who sabotage your dreams, and when Cole found the posts and read them aloud, I laughed because Ryan had rewritten history so thoroughly he genuinely believed it, which is what happens when delusion meets entitlement. 6 months in, Ryan called for the first time since everything blew up and asked if we could talk because he wanted to apologize, and when I asked what specifically, he admitted it was for the laptop and everything else, that he was jealous because I was succeeding while he was failing and he took it out on me, which was the first honest thing he'd ever said. I told him I heard him, but when he asked if we were good now, I said no, though we were better than we were, and maybe one day we could be good if he actually changed and stopped waiting for handouts. And when he said he hadn't asked Mom and Dad for money in 2 months, I congratulated him on that small but real start. He asked if I regretted what I did, and I thought about Marcus, the shelter kids, the textbooks, and said no, not even a little, explaining that I didn't destroy an opportunity, I just refused to fund another shortcut, and he couldn't argue with that. A year after the laptop incident, I got promoted to senior developer with a 20% raise and sent my parents a card that said, "Promoted. Doing well. Thanks for asking," which prompted Mom to call immediately wanting to celebrate, and I agreed to one dinner, without Ryan. And when she pushed back, I made it clear it was without Ryan or not at all. That dinner was painfully awkward until Dad put down his fork and admitted they failed me, that they prioritized Ryan's struggles over my successes, dismissed my pain, and treated the laptop incident like an inconvenience, and that I had every right to be furious, while Mom added they couldn't undo the past but wanted to do better. I asked if they actually were or just saying it, and they told me Ryan was in therapy, they'd stopped giving him money, he was supporting himself, and they were in couples therapy too, which finally sounded like real change. So I agreed to one dinner a month and said we'd see what happened. 2 years later, Marcus messaged again to say he'd been promoted to senior developer making $95,000 a year, bought his mom a small house, and was now training junior devs and paying it forward, all because of that original $15,000. And when I showed Cole, he called my revenge plot an accidental public service. Ryan and I eventually met for coffee, his idea, and he told me he'd paid Mom and Dad back the $15,000 over 2 years because his choices lost it, and it was his responsibility. And while we'd never be close, we agreed that civil was enough, shook hands, and went our separate ways. Now, 3 years later, I'm sitting in my home office, the one partially funded by Dad's credit card, a senior engineer leading a team, dating someone who respects me, having monthly dinners with my parents that aren't perfect but are honest, while Ryan's an assistant manager at Best by trying to do better, Marcus is making six figures and changing lives. And I look at my wall of degrees, thank you letters, and the framed credit card statement showing every one of those $15,000, which Cole calls my petty hall of fame, and I call proof that the best revenge isn't hurting people, but helping everyone else instead. Because Ryan destroyed my laptop, I destroyed his excuses, and somehow everyone ended up better for it, except his ego, which honestly needed to go anyway.